Chapter 10. As he stepped off the bus at the terminus, Tom thought about finding a connection, but decided it was better to walk until he found a local hotel. The conductor suggested the Alberton Hotel, mentioning it would probably take Tom about 15 minutes to get there on his long legs. Tom began the walk, looking around to spot the pub that he hoped would offer him a room for a couple of nights. But he became lost in his thoughts, striding through the dark, and realized too late that he'd been walking longer than 15 minutes. He saw a couple standing in a shadowed doorway. The older man looked disgruntled, and the woman who pulled a shawl protectively, almost fiercely, across her chest looked equally unhappy. She turned away before Tom could get a good look at her face, and the action looked deliberate. He didn't want to interrupt what happened to be an awkward conversation, but he was lost and cold. The interaction was short, but there was something about the pair that struck him as familiar. He wanted to look back, but made a dash across the wide road as the bus began moving towards him. By the time he dodged a horse and cart and a tram had gone by, he saw the woman had left. The older man remained in the doorway, but there was no street light to make out his features or even the shot from the opposite side of the street. Tom let the thought go and hunched deeper into his coat, glad of its heaviness, protecting him from the sheer of the wind now at his back. He followed the man's instructions, retracing his steps until he spotted the glimmer of the hotel's light, surprised he had missed it. A room was available, and he didn't even bother to pause for a beer, heading straight upstairs, where he flopped onto his bed, fully clothed, asleep within moments. When he woke, he felt it had been a restorative and mercifully dreamless sleep. It was still dark, but his father Bob's watch told him it wasn't long until sunrise. He yawned, but got out of bed immediately so he didn't drift back to sleep, and he stretched awake fully, realized he would be first into the bathroom with luck. He wasted no further time. Tom took care to look neat, even in his working clothes, combing damp hair into a slick parting. He quickly ate a bowl of porridge before pulling on a cap and heading out, once again retracing his footsteps to the terminus, where he knew he could catch an electric tram down to Black Diamond Corner. The conductor said he'd recognize it by the major intersection and the silent clock at its center. Tom finally worked out that this referred to the concrete pillar in the middle of the intersection, the second iteration of the traffic signal, because the first, which had been introduced to keep traffic flowing to the left, had been knocked over. The famous corner was hard to miss. He'd never seen so much traffic in such a small space, honking and easing its way around itself. Bicycle riders jostled against horse and carts, while cars seemed to feel they had superiority until a bus thundered close. It was a stream of metal and grinding gears. Tom positioned himself at the crossroads, on one of the corners outside a sweep of shops with everything from a news agency, a book and a stationery outlet, through to a general store. Further around the corner was a big shop called Easy Walkin', clearly a boots and shoe shop, and he imagined how his mother might wince at the cannibalization of the spelling. Men in work clothes began arriving, and by a few minutes past 7, there was a small crowd of shuffling blokes in shabby attire, each with a hungry look. Tom no longer wanted to be viewed as one of those impoverished men. He made a snap decision, not at all sure it was the right one, but determined to follow his instincts. He wended his way to the port, scanning its skyline for the wool store he'd heard so much about. Tom reminded himself that South Australia's entire clip passed through the Port Adelaide wool store, its housing responsible for storing, loading and routing the state wool's trade through to the busy looms of Britain and Europe. He knew to look for the towering structures erected by those enormous graziers, the powerful elder Sterling and Co. There was surely a job for him in that warehouse, where wool needed to be unpacked for the buyers to value, and where it was sorted and baled for transport overseas. Few men as young as he would have his knowledge to class the wool before export. Although the size of the wool store made him blink upon arrival, it was a giant. No other word for it. Tom's instinct was rewarded quickly. His credentials as a wool classer got him tested, and he impressed the bloke who offered him a job immediately, saying he would be back in a flash. As he waited at the door for the man to return, he craned his neck to take in the towering 3 stories of bluestone. A man nearby smoked a newly lit cigarette, winked. "Fresh in?" Tom nodded. "Farina, Tom Catchlove." He extended a hand. From Wichelina, the man said, looking impressed. Yes, I know it. You're certainly far from home. I'm one of the stock agents from West Farmers, Charlie Hunter. They shook hands. Well, I'm actually from Paradise Station on the Wichelina property, Tom explained. I'm a wool classer. You're so young, never done anything else. Why did you leave? Good money for a young bloke like you. Time to lie. He gave a shrug. Just wanted to see more of the world, experience the big smoke for a bit. Hunter was looking at him, slightly perplexed. So Tom added some drama to his story. My father passed away. I just needed a change of scenery. The man nodded. Fair enough. Tom gazed around the enormous warehouse. I don't think I've ever seen any space this big under one roof. Hunter chuckled. Wait until they get going for the day, and constant activity fills the quiet space you want, but it is impressive. See that sawtooth roof line? Tom looked to where he pointed, nodding. Lets in loads of natural light, which I'm pretty sure you wool guessers appreciate. Bit different to the shearing shed, eh? Sure is, Tom said, just going with the strangest conversation, full of the same boozers and bullshit artists. But you'll find some former cockies and ex-shearers, and of course the ladies. Tom frowned. Ladies? Hunter grinned. A grand old gang who do the catering for the buyers and staff. Top tucker, he said with a wink. Do you smoke? When Tom shook his head, the man's jaw dropped it open. Bugger me. What's wrong with you? Bad lungs, Tom lied. He'd just never taken to it, having grown up watching too many men with hacking coughs end up spitting blood into their ragged handkerchief. Ah, well, you're lucky then, because there's a smoking ban in the wool store. Bit of a bastard, but that's how it is. Good luck, catch love, see you around. The man in charge of the wool balers for the day returned. He signed a sheet and handed it to him. Show that to the bloke in charge. And before Tom could ask more, the man had turned away and was dealing with selecting another worker from the anxious group of men waiting to be picked. Tom made his way inside. Years of wool passing through the vast space meant the timber floors had absorbed lanolin and the familiar earthy smell comforting him immediately. Towering timber supports held up the enormous floors where the wool would travel up the various levels and ultimately to be loaded onto ships. Tom understood he was to work on the ground floor, where the bales came in for weighing, cataloguing, of course, testing his roll, ensuring the wool inside each bale matched the description branded on its outside, and that it had been properly skirted and classed at its origination. The man who hired him impressed him upon him that the top-line reputation of Australian Wool International had to be preserved through its final rigorous testing. Tom's new role carried the weight of responsibility. The work day began with a loud whistle and turned the stores into a beehive of relentless activity. Everyone had a job, and they got busy, each focusing on their individual role. It was a flurry of motion and noise, from the sacks trucks being used to unload the wool bales from lorries, men weighing them and others hauling them off to line them up. Buyers streamed in to value the thousands of bales. All the rookies and casual fellows lucky to get a day's work were given the unenviable task of what was called the oddments section. Tom could see that this included sorting the crunchings, which were stained, maggoty, or fly-blown, all the bits they collectively knew as stags. Meanwhile, the wool that really mattered was lined up in bales and opening for checking. Tom's job, alongside a small mob of classers, was to help the stock agent as they made their appraisal. He was one of the fellows who would pull out roughly 10 pounds of the wool and drop it on the floor to be inspected. Depending on Tom's decision, the bales would then be moved up the floors to the top where agents waited to do their buying. But first Tom had the tricky task of cramming that 10 pounds of wool back into the bale by hand. It was as arduous as any day's work in the shearing shed, but he enjoyed the familiar ache in his muscles as he began to expend his energy. The hard work was the perfect distraction too, and the hours passed quickly in this experience that was new and yet somehow so familiar. The smell of the wool, the feel of the lanolin on his fingers, again the muted sound of the floorboards and the tufts of fibres floating in the air was all reminiscent of home and his beloved shearing shed. Now and then it was also reminded him of a twisted and broken young man bleating like a frightened sheep, and that led him to think about the death of his parents and his helpless sister, and just how alone he felt. On they went. The thoughts couldn't be stopped, but they could be diverted, redirected. Tom knew he needed to let the past go. He needed to make sense of his new life he'd thrown himself into and find where he might fit. If Fleur were being honest, she would have to admit that Jimmy Coghlan, or James, as Irma had begun referring to him, had turned himself out better than she'd imagined he might for the snobbish dinner that her stepmother had organised. It was laughable now how her manner of speaking had changed to reflect her hostess role in front of the Coglins. Suddenly she was using tongs, linen napkins, smiling a strangely smug smile, and communicating with poor Nan as though she was a royal servant, and a subtle wave of Irma's bejewelled hand needed to be interpreted precisely. It could mean one thing or something else entirely. That was Nan's problem to navigate. Irma was powdered and rouged from forehead to the lace collar of a navy wool dress Fleur had not seen before. That would explain her almost secretive trip into the city earlier that week. Fleur had seen the box from the My Emporium in Rundle Street. It must have cost her father a pricey sum, going by the quality of the dress. Clearly Irma was out to impress from every angle, although the new sleek line of the current fashion did not suit Irma's rotund, shorter stature. Fleur knew the fashionable, tailored looks suited her taller, slimmer shape well, but she had not dressed to please Jimmy Coglin, or his father, who kept staring at her from the other side of the table. She was dressed with some care, only because she wearily agreed to go to the Semaphore Palais with Jimmy after an early dinner with their parents and Irma. It was her way of escaping the orchestrated event, which was trying so hard to be something it could never be, and seemed to have a more sinister aspect. Fleur was concerned that by sitting down with the Coglins she was giving her tacit agreement to an engagement with Jimmy, and felt repugnant. She would have to explain to him after dinner that she was simply being sociable. Irma, meanwhile, looked delighted. Fleur believed her stepmother was imagining herself seated at a long polished table over which hung chandeliers set with crystals, solid silver, and the finest European china, somewhere like East Terrace, where the grand bluestone homes were stacked over several stories with lacework and balconies. Irma had forgotten or chose to ignore that they were near the port, so far from East Terrace that most of those city dwellers had likely not seen the port since the day that arrived. While the Applebys were perhaps considered a family of means, their home was modest, with none of the grandeur that Irma was projecting with her lace and linen, her strange accent and pinched lips, her expensive garments, and the shrewd glances she kept casting towards Jimmy as though the deal was done. The excursion to the Palais was Fleur's only ticket out, and given it was a dance gathering for autumn, she was outfitted in a favourite evening dress she'd owned for a couple of years but not got much use from. It was fashioned from a new fabric called rayon chiffon that was crease resistant and was cut on the bias to follow the lean lines of her body masterfully. With the flourish of her short butterfly-style sleeve and a ruffle from her knees, the dress was essentially white but featured an artfully washed-out geometric pattern of red and charcoal. A patent black belt cinched her waist, matching black pumps that had low enough heels for dancing. Her plan was to accompany Jimmy to the dance hall, and then gently explain that Irma's plans were premature, unfounded in any reality, and that she was sorry he had been misled. She was sure she could walk the tightrope between honesty and giving offence, putting it to Jimmy in such a way that he would not feel jilted. However, going by the nervous glances full of expectation that he kept sliding her way, she would need to work fast. This evening she would nip any anticipation of marriage firmly in the bud. "Are you looking forward to the Palais tonight, Fleur?" Jimmy asked, as if he dropped it on her thoughts. Stars! Now he was putting on some sort of performance too. "Oh, well, it's quite a long time since I've attended a dance there, Jimmy. I'm certainly intrigued to see it again. I wish the Palais de Danse was still operating on the Torrens." Irma joined in enthusiastically, diving at the last remnants of steam, trickle, pudding, and custard on her mouth. Fleur watched the lace-edged napkin come away not only with custard but a waxy carmine imprint of those lips, and her insides clenched again with anger that Irma was so clever with May Appleby's treasure. She desperately wanted to correct Irma's pronunciation of the floating dance boat that had been all the rage since the 1920s on Adelaide's main waterway. Irma had slaughtered the words, but it seemed no one but Fleur minded. Instead, Irma's comment set off the older people at the table on a trip down memory lane, including her father. She didn't mind his indulgent smile and remarks about its Arabic decoration because she knew he was probably remembering happy days with her mother. "James, can I offer you a glass of port?" Irma asked, cutting across Henry's reminiscence. about dancing with his first slice on the floating pallet. Oh, no, thank you, Mrs. Appleby. Oh, do call me Irma, she said. We're going to be family soon. Right, well, Fleur stood up to stop her stepmother from continuing. Jimmy, if we're going to avoid the queues, I guess we could get going. Off you go. You love birds, Irma said, and won a scowl from Fleur. Please don't embarrass Jimmy, Irma. Oh, come on, you young thing shouldn't be so shy. We're not, but we're also not lovebirds. Irma tapped her nose and giving a knowing smile as if communicating some great secret and clutching at Henry's hand, repulsing Fleur even more. This wasn't some big emotional moment. Shall we go, Jimmy? Fleur said pointedly. She moved around the table to kiss her father, who had been noticeably quiet this evening. She wondered if he was feeling as dismayed as she was to be seated around the table with its sinister intention, or was he as fatigued as he suddenly looked. She frowned at his pale complexion, which was bordering on grey. Dad, is something wrong? He stood unsteadily and patted her hand. All is fine. You look lovely tonight, Fleur. Then he leaned in so that only she could hear. Your mother would be proud. Fleur wished he hadn't said that in that moment, because it only made her more aware of the hole in their lives and the impostor who had become May's place, who had claimed May's place. Good night, everyone, she said, letting go of her father's hand, which felt pretty dry. She let Jimmy say more formal farewells to the other two people around the table. Outside the house, she gave a sound of despair. You all right? Jimmy asked, falling back into his normal way of speaking. No, Jimmy, I'm not. I hate this charade. What? Forget it. Jimmy gripped her elbow a little too hard. Don't speak to me like that. Fleur was determined not to wince and let him win the satisfaction of her pain. Like what, Jimmy? Like I'm less than you. Is that what I did, or did I just use a word you don't know how to say, spell, or understand? What was wrong with her being this cruel? She promised her father she would try harder. You won't be talking down to me when we're married. No, I won't, because we aren't getting married, Jimmy. We are, I've been told. By Irma. Fleur shook her head, and with that he couldn't know what was despair for them both. She's lying. There's nothing assured about this mad idea, Jimmy. I'm really sorry, but she's got you hoodwinked because it's not happening. But why? He frowned. He looked Neanderthal at his forehead crease, making his brows appear even more hooded and protruding. She shook the churlish thought away, flicking her hair. Kindness wasn't that her mantra in the mortuary, and so it should be outside of it. She heard in May Apple's voice. There had been nothing kind or gentle about her words, so she tried again. Let's just say we aren't suited and leave it at that. I think we are. My father and your mother think so too. She wished he wouldn't badger her. She's so far from my mother, it's not worth discussing, and it's certainly not up to your parents who I marry. You'll need a man when your father's dead. She knew Jimmy didn't mean it as an insult. He was too much of a blunt instrument to fashion anything so subtle. He was simply stating the facts as he understood them, but his words still managed to land a bruising blow, and she felt as though all the wind had left her lungs. My father is not dying, she ground out. Easily distracted, Jimmy saw the bus hove into view and pointed, grinning, his mood changing in a heartbeat. Come on, the bus is coming. Fleur sighed, grateful for the breeze that blew their sour words gently away. The early evening was not as cold as she thought, and the milder weather, as well as being away from Irma and her pretensions, improved her mood. As soon as she didn't like the Cobblins, with the less than professional way and rather grasping idea to enter undertaking, the engagement was certainly not Jimmy's idea. This plan had Irma stamped all over it, and the more Fleur turned it over in her head, the more she became convinced that there was something greater at stake here. Irma had been looking very pleased with herself recently, while Hen was barely a shade of the tall, strong man she knew. He was only just 60. Fleur frowned into her thoughts, resigning herself to the fact that her father looked to be sickening. Irma was right. Perhaps his drinking was taking his final toll, although she knew plenty of other alcoholics far older than her father who was still getting on with work and life. She recalled how her father had apparently dismissed her doctor's warning. Had he seen a doctor, or was Irma lying? Thanks for listening.